Marlin, thanks for joining me. It's great to see you again. A lot of organizations across government thinking about strategies and execution for generative artificial intelligence. What are some of the important components that should be a part of that? One, ethical use of AI is included in the executive order. What are some of the components that you think agencies should focus on?
That's a pretty large question. Could probably sit here and talk for quite a while on that one. I'll try to focus on just a couple of them I think that we need to focus on. So generative AI, kind of made itself popular here in the last year or two, and people have been talking about implementing it into various systems for various different reasons. I think one of the things that we need to be careful when it comes to generative AI is not trying to use it for everything. I think that one of the tenets that we need to adopt when utilizing AI in general is to be a little bit more narrow in focus. And generative AI tends to be very broad. And it also tends to be somewhat of a creative element more than a factual element. So I think that it needs to be coupled with other technologies such as RAG, which is retrieval augmented generative AI. And the reason why I think that's important is, I'll just give you an example. Generative AI is whatever it's trained on, it doesn't necessarily know what is true and what's not true. So for example, generative AI, let's just take ChatGPT for example. The joke, but it's kind of real, is the fact that it knows that the world is round. But it also knows the world is flat because it's been trained on information that says that. It doesn't necessarily understand what is an authoritative source. So one, it can get things wrong. We call those hallucinations. It can also be out of date because it's only trained up to a certain period in time. And this can lead to, incorrect information. So if the government is going to use it, they need to have some way of utilizing its strengths, which are being able to talk to it in natural language and receive, answers back that take into account the intent of your question and the context of your question and give you good information, but that it doesn't give you poor information. So with something like RAG, you can introduce factual information to a generative AI system, and then it will give you back information that is factual based on that data set. Of course, again, then it's, how good is your data set? But as long as that is a good data set and those are factual information, you'll be able to get that back. So I think that it needs to be, understood that generative AI alone probably shouldn't be used in lots of cases outside of creative ones, and that it should be coupled with other technologies. The other thing that I think is important from an ethical perspective is to make sure that the information that you're utilizing is that data set that you're complementing generative AI with, that is factual, doesn't have any bias in it, which can, just since we're all humans, bias can be introduced into data sets just as easily as it can be introduced in life unintentionally, and we need to make sure that that doesn't happen as well. So I think those are two strong ethical portions. We can also go down the road of, personal information and other things, but I think those are two strong, more operational and front of mind things that should be considered when utilizing something like generative AI in government.
How does one proof for biased data? Because if I'm the one that's doing the proofing, but I'm unintentionally biased, I won't see it necessarily.
Yeah, and there's really no, wonderful method, to eliminate bias. But if the teams are constructed with people who, it's not one person making that decision, bias can be eliminated. Now, of course, you could have a group of people all working on the same project that all seem to lean in a particular bias direction. But as long as it's being worked on by more than, one person. I think a good example of bias in generative AI was the Google AI that when they were finished with it, they realized that it tended to give opinions that were slightly more right-leaning than left-leaning. And that's just while humorous, you want to avoid those types of things being entered into it.
How will an organization in the federal government or elsewhere know that it's doing well at accomplishing the things that you've described in this conversation so far? What are the kind of the markers to measure success or time to reposition?
Yeah, so great question. I think that's the proof is in the pudding, right? You're not going to train a model in, an AI model and then immediately go to implementation, right? There is a vetting period where you actually provided information and make sure that you're getting back the intended responses. especially if we're moving away from generative AI and even into neural networking and deep learning, we're not necessarily sure how we get from point A to point B. So that validation portion at the end is incredibly important.
Marlin, it's great to have you here. Thanks for your time today.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.